Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles is a game loved by many and those who got to play it, but never played by many more due to the tough hardware constraints that were available to it at the time and somewhat niche nature. But from August 27th, the experience opens up to all regardless of the platform that you're playing it on. My name is Joesephyr and welcome to this video review for Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles Remastered Edition. Now before we get started, I'd like to extend a massive thank you to Square Enix for sponsoring this content and for giving me the opportunity to play the game so that I can give you guys an informed opinion on what the pros and cons are of the game, whether I think it's ultimately worth purchasing, and altogether what kind of thoughts I had about the game in general. The basic premise for Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles Remastered, or rather Crystal Chronicles as a whole, is that you journey out in an action RPG setting similar to titles like Diablo, but in a Final Fantasy setting that has a lot of love for its franchise, giving you bosses, experiences, things like Mulberers, Tonberries, all sorts of love and fan service for various aspects of the franchise, while you go out to travel in order to collect a rare liquid called myrrh, which will enhance the crystals that are living in your hometowns in order to protect the world from a deadly miasma that has taken over the world. Playing through the game, you can choose one of 4 different races, or classes if you will, that have slightly differing stats and appearances, and a 5th appearance type for each of the 4 races and both genders for each of those races has been added to the game. So you have Clavats, which are your human-esque jack-of-all-trades characters. You have Lilties, who are your strength-based, almost dwarf-esque characters. Ukes, who are kind of bodiless souls that are your black mages or mages within the game that are specialising in magic. And you have Selkies, who are closest to an elf-type character who wield rackets and also are the speediest characters of the bunch. As somebody who owned the original Crystal Chronicles for the Nintendo GameCube back in 2004, I was only ever able to experience it as a single-player experience, purely because the hardware constraints that were on the game at the time included having to own a Game Boy Advance, having to own link cables, and obviously having up to 4 people all connected up in the same room playing that at all times. Now luckily with the remastered version, that is no longer as much of an issue because of online functionality. I'm pleased to say that the core gameplay of Crystal Chronicles has maintained itself within its new iteration with updated visuals, an overhauled soundtrack, which is a lovely soundtrack inspired by sort of Celtic notes, things like that, and it's done very, very well here. Basic gameplay will function just about. It's very simple. You only have an attack button. You scroll through your different commands so that you're able to cast spells. If you're playing with other players, then you can stack those spells in order to create fused versions of them so that they're stronger and have a wider area of effect. All of this provides a really fun, simple, and just generally enjoyable action RPG experience. One thing that has been lost, however, that was a gameplay aspect in the original, was the fact that every player on their own individual Game Boy Advance had a section of the map that was individual to them. So for example, one player would have the actual map itself, another would be able to say where the treasure chests were, another would be able to say where the enemies were, etc. Now unfortunately, because of the way that this game works, so the local sort of multiplayer has been taken away in favour of online multiplayer. That's no longer the case. Now the map is literally just in the top right hand corner where you can see everything all at once. So while this is kind of not that big a deal to new players, and they probably won't even notice a difference, players who played the original might see this as a bit of a loss of individuality within the game. Now the biggest hot topic when it comes to the remastered edition of Crystal Chronicles is the aforementioned loss of local cooperative play. Being a purely multiplayer experience, generally speaking, you can play through the game in single player, but it doesn't give you anywhere near as much joy as it does to travel with 3 friends and play through the game as a whole. The matchmaking between cross-play, so whether you're playing on PS4, Switch, Android or iOS, is actually very seamless. Having tried it myself and just jumped into a dungeon and then had somebody else join me or joined in on somebody else, you have sort of 30-minute one-time codes that will give you the room so that you're able to sort of share that out with whoever you need to. It works really very well. However, one of the things that I think is very off-putting, certainly to players of the original, is that going in and out of dungeons is the only actual thing you can do within multiplayer. Players of the originals know that you have a hometown at the beginning where players are encouraged to kind of all have their own families. You all grow as one town. You kind of all talk to each other's families and the relationships grow within that. That now can't really happen with the Remastered Edition because you don't travel outside of dungeons together. You don't actually travel as one caravan anymore. And I tried looking over and over again to see if it was something that I was simply just not finding. And unfortunately, it is not the case. Traveling as one caravan is actually just no longer present. This wouldn't be too much of a big deal in and of itself. However, I did find that when playing, you're obviously trying to finish the dungeon in order to collect droplets of myrrh. And at the end of collecting 3 drops of myrrh, that current year ends and it starts you back at the next year in order to collect 3 more. Because the host of the multiplayer room is the only person that actually gains that drop of myrrh, while everybody gains all spoils, all artifacts, things that give you stats, things like that. The only person that actually progresses the story is the first player or the host of the multiplayer room. Now, this did create a couple of instances where I would be the host of the room and I'd be playing and I'd get that 3rd drop of myrrh and then I'd be sent back to the beginning. But because of different restrictions within the game, you may not be able to get back to the same dungeon you were at straight away, whereas the second player might still be there on this previous year. And this created a bit of a disconnect between me and the other player, where we couldn't connect up straight away, and there were downtime where you're having to wait for the other person to be able to get back to that dungeon before you can play again. For the purposes of this review, I was only able to play really with 2 players. And that means that one of you is going to be carrying the Crystal Chalice, which is the artifact that is used within the game to collect the drops of myrrh and also creates a protective bubble around the players that stops you from getting hurt by the miasma or the poison that permeates the rest of the world. One player is always going to be carrying this chalice. In single player, instead of a second player, then a NPC Moogle will travel around with you and carry the chalice for you. So it does mean that you're able to play the game single player if you want to. But in 2-player, because one of you is carrying the chalice at all times, it means that it's a little bit harder for you to engage in combat. But that being said, it doesn't really take away from the core gameplay and how it's very enjoyable for you to join up with friends and just sort of go to town on various different enemies. And the spell fusion mechanic is still absolutely riotous, like being able to sort of time your spells together and get a real sense of amazement, really, when you get that Faraga off, or Curaga, or Holy, or anything of these bigger spells. They really do give a sense of wonder when you pull us off with friends. And I do think that the experience is definitely very much enhanced by having 4 players. So if you have 3 friends that are able to play with you, then it does make for a much better experience. But being able to play with other players that perhaps you don't know is actually very easy as well. Whilst playing the game, I did have somebody drop into the game that we were playing, presumably another person who was reviewing this game. And even then, just having 3 players did make a huge difference. So as long as you've got at least 3 and it's not just one person always carrying the chalice, then it does make for a much more enjoyable experience. The online functionality isn't the only upgrade that Crystal Chronicles Remastered Edition has had. Like I said earlier, the visuals and the sound have been upgraded massively. In fact, I didn't really notice just how massive the visual upgrades were until I actually compared it side by side with the original version of the game. But it runs lovely. It does get locked to 30 frames per second, but I imagine that this is due to the constraints of cross-platform play. So because you can play this on PS4, Nintendo Switch, iOS, or Android, they wanted to lock it to 30 frames per second so that it was easier for everybody to all play together. I played the game on the PS4, so it was a little bit of a oh okay moment when I first loaded it up, but it soon permeated very quickly. And the music, as I say, has been upgraded greatly, so there's been new recordings for all of the soundtrack and everything like that, and it all sounds wonderful. I absolutely love the music in this game. It's got a real Celtic tone to it, and it's just quite unique, and there's nothing quite like the music of Crystal Chronicles. So after this review, I would encourage you to go and look up some of the music from the game, as it is just that good. There is also a lot of in-game content that's been added on as well. There are new high difficulty dungeons, which I think will be really enjoyable for people who played the original and can just jump in with their friends online and just go for it. There's new weapons, new items to pick up within those dungeons, so the actual increase in content is quite substantial. Not only that, but you can actually gain mimics, which are sort of costumes or character skins based on other characters within the game. So NPC characters, you can suddenly play as them. And they've also added DLC so that you can play as, or mimic as, other characters from the Crystal Chronicles franchise. So for example, Yuri and Chelinka from Ring of Fates, or Charlotta from Echoes of Time, or Lael from the Crystal Bearers. So if you're a fan of the Crystal Chronicles franchise, then this may be quite nice for you. Voice acting has also been added into the cutscene, so every major NPC is now voice acted, which I think is a nice addition, though I didn't think it was something that was really necessary for Crystal Chronicles, because it was a game that was never really designed to have voice acting in the first place. But I think that it's a nice addition regardless.
I'm just a Moogle that likes to get around. I learned all sorts of things in my travels before I knew it.
In terms of the best way to actually play the game, I honestly believe that having one person on a PS4 and then 3 people on portable devices, or 4 people on either Switch, iOS or Android devices all in the same room is the best way to play the game. And I say that because I believe that Crystal Chronicles was definitely most loved as a couch co-op style title. The online functionality certainly isn't bad, and being able to drop in and out of dungeons as frequently as you can, like, it really is very easy, even across different platforms, is certainly not bad, and it does definitely open the game up to a much wider array of people. But there are certain things that come with that, such as the inability to run together as a caravan and have that hometown grow all together, and those little breakups within sort of the story progression, the fact that only the host actually sort of progresses the story and the other players are kind of just there to collect loot and help out, I wasn't sure I agreed with. The last thing that I did want to mention is that if you're not sure about whether you want to purchase Crystal Chronicles Remastered Edition or not, Square Enix has actually released a light version of the title, which is free to play for all of the aforementioned devices, whether it be phones, Switch, or PS4, and you can download this and play the first 3 dungeons with anybody, whether they've purchased the game or not. And if one person has purchased the game, and you can play with those players on the light edition and play the first 13 dungeons. So while you won't be able to play the high-end sort of difficulty content, you'll be able to experience a very large amount of the game with another player just going through those 13 dungeons. So it'll be a great way, and it's actually a really nice move on Square Enix's part, for you to experience Crystal Chronicles and know for sure if it's a game that you want to purchase for yourself. All in all, I enjoyed my time with Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles Remastered Edition, and I do plan to play it a lot more after its major release in order to experience the 4-player online multiplayer, particularly for the high difficulty dungeons present later on in the game. And it has charming visuals, it has a beautiful soundtrack, and it's a very unique presentation of the action RPG genre. I did, however, have frustrations and holdups with the hiccups in the transition from local multiplayer to online multiplayer, as having heard stories from other players of the original about their caravans and the adventures that they had as a group, growing their hometowns, things like that, I didn't feel that there was quite as much soul to the multiplayer as there had been on the GameCube version. I believe that the £24.99 price tag is very reasonable for the game, considering quite how much content there is, and is additionally how much has been added to the game. And the light edition of the game means that everyone can at least experience the game enough to know whether it's for them or not. Now that's going to be all for my video review for Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles Remastered Edition. Thank you all very much for watching. Don't forget to check out all of the social media links in my description box below, including my Twitter, Twitch, Discord and Patreon. I will be playing Crystal Chronicles on my Twitch channel, so if you'd like to come and join me for that and leave a follow, then it would be very much appreciated. A big shout out to all of my patrons as well, who support my channel as much as they do, and with every video I also shout out one of my patrons at random to give thanks to showing their support as much as they do for this channel, and today that person is going to be 42. So thank you very much for your support. Don't forget to like the video, share it out to anyone you think might be interested in Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, leave a comment below as to whether you plan to pick up the game or try out the light edition at the very least, and of course don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you all very much for watching, and I hope to see you guys in the next video, and I will see you soon. Take care.